I'm going to be sharing today about treating the traumatized self-relating, all based on an essay by Pete Walker. And there's too much to cover in one video, so at some point in the future I will revisit this topic and explore it further. So the first thing I'll do is I'll start with a practice. I attend a group called Rise to Resilience, and this week it's like, I believe, a 6-week course from Kripalu Wellness Center, upstate New York. And I found it really helpful when we did, based on our values, we reflected on our strengths. So I felt instantly gravitated towards transcendence. And I'll revisit some of these others because they all kind of hold hands. And, we may identify a little more with one or the other in terms of where our strengths show up. But they all exist in all of us. It's like some pods are more fed, more obvious, and some pods are not, but each one is already inside. So transcendence relates to hope, humor, spirituality, gratitude, appreciation of beauty, appreciation of excellence. And so I would like to say that, for me personally, it's a double-edged sword. I was raised in a culture where it felt like very oppressive and not transcending the spiritual practices. It was very sheltered, very negative noticing. There's no innocent mistakes. You're really always on trial, not just in my family, but also some ways in the community. So transcending those situations was extremely difficult and, certainly not something I would have wanted to do consciously if I'd known now, you'd have to go through all that in order to become transcendent or learn special skills or have strengths. But maybe, excuse me, I had a lot of pressure in my ear today. Excuse me. But maybe in terms, once I read this, you'll get an idea of how I really do love these strengths. And me saying that, maybe I wouldn't have signed up for what I did is only because I don't know what would have been in any other case. So these are my strengths and also my weaknesses. And this is the dark side of me and also the light side of me. So accepting the lordship of the permeating source, getting past what's right in front of me, getting past materialism. By being a survivor, I had to connect with my spirit. Practicing positive emotions in order to get into states of light and power because it wasn't really taught to me or role modeled. Healing intergenerational trauma and collective pain because the people around me, my immediate family, even grandparents and so on, and in the community were not focused on healing. So getting past the inner critic is facing my demons, transcending, aspects of myself so that I could see the perfection and the bigger patterns and be who I'm supposed to be, practicing acceptance also by living life and letting life live itself through me, through others. It seeks itself, and from that place kind of being generous by allowing people to come into their life, transcending the urges to judge or to be comfortable. And, I've had to become an inner parent, inner witness, inner friend, and that I never had. And I've had the ability to be generous with others, valuing the spirit basically in them. So now that I've given this little practice as a way of making this personal, I'm going to read directly from basically almost paraphrasing. I don't think this is, very little is in my own words. It's mostly kind of just trying to say what he said, because I think it's really valuable, and that all of this goes together with how I could do this practice of my strength. But it's only because of how many challenges I had, and I'm going to go into it now. How did I learn how to become transcendent? I relate to almost everything he said here, treating traumatized self-relating, and that's why I do this work, because I have had to transcend some of the patterns, and I want to support others to transcend some of the patterns. So developmental trauma disorder is what we often call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The most destructive childhood traumas are relational. So children of traumatizing caretakers are raised with an overwhelming amount of contempt and neglect, which robs them of their birthright to be copiously loved and supported, suffocates them in an abandonment, depression of shame, fear, and hopelessness. Such children respond to being continuously traumatized by learning to relate to themselves with the same constant abuse and neglect as their parents. They develop self-traumatizing relationship with themselves. The only way out is to be therapeutically guided into reawakening and restoring the developmentally arrested instincts of self-compassion and self-protection in a safe relationship that models caring and support. Adult survivors remain hamstrung by anxiety, excruciating shame, debilitating depression, troublesome relationships with their self and others, and these aberrations don't go away on their own. One must develop. We become robbed of the ability to access and develop the innate self-esteem that's possessed at birth when we lack any supportive or loving relationship with a caretaker. The inner capacity to feel empathy for ourselves during difficult times dwindles, disappears when we do not receive sympathy from our caretakers, especially when we're also punished or shamed for crying and feeling sorry for ourselves, which is sorrow. Also, self-protection, the healthy innate instinct in every child to say no to abuse and neglect. Dysfunctional parents typically harshly punish children for angrily crying or complaining about unfairness. Self-protection, reflexes over time are traumatically repressed and lost to consciousness. Worse, when such children are not allowed to protect themselves against injustice, they soon lose their ability to defend themselves in all relationships. I'm going to make a comment. So far, obviously, this is what I've shared here, but elsewhere as well. This is the story of growing up with trauma. Unprotestingly complex trauma, developmental trauma, relational trauma. Unprotestingly, we allow others to treat us as poorly as our original caretakers. We come to implicitly believe that abuse and neglect are the price tag of belonging. The degree that instincts of self-compassion and self-protection become inoperable, survivors unconsciously forfeit rights and needs to be treated fairly in current and future relationships, and we never learn to form boundaries or set limits with antagonistic others. We become ripe targets for relational exploitation. And then this is how the installment of the toxic inner critic happens. Children instinctively mimic the parents. They learn to stymie, sorry, I don't know that word, stymie and punish just as their parents. So children instinctively mimic their parents and learn to stymie and punish just as parents do. Excessively judgmental. This is what happens. Excessively judgmental, because no such thing as a harmless mistake. Faux pas, small potatoes, miscue. Everything's a big deal. Preoccupied with shortcomings, striving to be mistake-free, eventually only seeing imperfection and lack inside of us. We call this negatively noticing. The superego becomes perverted. It goes toxic. It goes viral. It leaves little to no space for developing healthy, user-friendly, self-supportive self-ego, which has self-compassion and self-protection, healthy self, right? Toxic inner critic finally co-opts the creativity. It starts to invent erroneous, often paradoxical self-criticisms that can last a lifetime. And Pete Walker, as the writer, says in his work, he has seen a workaholic client trashing their self as lazy, prodigies branding their self as stupid, beauties declaring their self ugly, empaths bemoaning their cold-heartedness. We're constantly, when we're survivors, we were implanted with this toxic inner critic. We started to constantly attack, shame, and scare ourselves as teenagers and adults. We self-labeled ourselves irredeemable, unworthy even of life, crazy. The inner bully has a multimodal attack of extreme perfectionism to blame the child for being imperfect. As an aside, obviously, everyone has a different definition of imperfect. We're talking about the trauma from the parents. This is how you have to be perfect, and we're constantly imperfect because we can't match it, right? That's the idea here. It enforces using our own creativity. It enforces endangerment visualizations of an overwhelmingly hostile and rejecting future. Systematic inner punishing of any behavior, thought, feeling, even a healthy aspiration, even a body flaw. as less than perfect and routinely scorns any approval that comes our way, spiraling deeper into excruciating fear and self-disgust. The inner bully unconsciously is attracted to other bullies in the wider society who further traumatize. Freud calls this repetition compulsion. When you keep doing the same thing as if maybe you'll get it right next time. And tolerate these, and you know, the inner bully brings the person, the whole human, to situations where they're further traumatized, because the one will tolerate it, because in childhood it was taught that it's too dangerous to protect unfairness. There's a few things that happen with survivors, and this is where I'll kind of leave off, and then hopefully, you know, I will revisit this for the sake of moving further into it. The next topic would be reviving self-compassion and self-protection, but I will leave off here with what happens when we're untreated, and this is why it's worth it. However you do it, support groups, talking with people you trust. If you recognize any of these, it's time. If you're hearing this video and I don't even advertise this video, it's time. Untreated survivors can be captured and psychologically enslaved by narcissistic bullies for all the reasons mentioned above. 2, can become narcissistic bullies themselves. 3, retreat into self-isolation to avoid the threatening threat of relationships. 4, amass a history of failed persecutory relations that morph inner critics into a posse of invisible ghosts. And often, all of the people who are untreated often have huge amounts of social anxiety without the ability to let in any kind of interpersonal comfort. Just being held, dancing together, singing together, cooking together, eating together. You might make a mistake, something might go wrong, you might be rejected, right? Suffering intense alienation, tortured by self-hate and self-disgust for failing to be impossibly perfect. And all of this, to summarize, has been caused by a development lack of parental kindness and having parental taboos against normal, healthy complaining. And to leave off here, it is possible to have a healthy self-criticism, which is a kind and gentle voice, which is one of self-questioning, and which is interested in self-improvement. In which case it's okay to make a mistake. You're healing, you're growing, you're improving. And that's our goal, right? That's where we bring in what I started with here, the transcendence, transcending where we came from and the trauma. Thank you for spending time with me. I hope this was not too triggering. And at some point in the future, I hope to revisit this topic and share more.